my name is Toves and welcome to my channel as I'm back playing some more Planet Zoo, continuing to check out the Arid Animal Pack, newly released. And today, this episode, we're going to be checking out the African Crested Porcupine. So quite a bit of this one. This is going to be more speed build than anything actually. I'm trying to experiment with something new, a bit longer speed build, a bit slower. So hopefully you guys will see some of the details. So I'm going to talk to you about the build, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about the African Crested Porcupine as we go. So in this first section, you'll see me shaping the land. So African Crested Porcupines are typically animals that you find in like kind of rocky, hilly terrain. So I'm giving them lots of shape and lots of areas of their habitat to explore. And this bit you see me working on here is basically because they're nocturnal animals, so it's always a bit of a challenge in Planet Zoo to handle these sorts of animals, and I'm sure that's a real thing that comes up in like zoo planning and things. But yeah, when you've got an animal that is largely going to spend all of its time in the daytime hiding away, how do you deal with that? So yeah, I'm trying to create this kind of simulated burrow for them. And if you've seen my stuff before, generally what I tend to do, especially with these smaller animals, is I tend to give them multiple little areas within the habitat to explore and where guests can see them. And there's like a few different reasons for that. Partly it's because then you can kind of get different viewpoints for the guests and you've not got kind of great big empty habitats. But also that you kind of get away with it being actually a little bit smaller than the game wants it to be, because it doesn't feel so small because there's multiple places for them to sit. So here we are kind of replicating their kind of rocky terrain that they like. And I used multiple different things actually here, kind of giving them the faux rock. And then I found that some of that savanna rock worked really well. I find that the desert rock itself is actually a bit too kind of orangey. So yeah, it's a bit of a blend of that. And then I go back and use some mud things later. There's quite a few different areas, as I said. This is their kind of underground burrowy area, and then we've got this area that alongside them trying to use the exhibit animals. Something that I'm doing here is trying to complement all of these arid animals with a bunch of the exhibit animals that we've already got within the game. So here you can see me trying to combine two habitats or two exhibits for the desert hairy scorpion, which I thought was an appropriate one to bring alongside these. And what I was doing there is, because I've got two right next to each other, trying to mix it up, and you'll see me do more of this. I'm trying to keep them so that they look different. So there's a couple of ways of doing this, like using the different terrain examples, or the like props and things that the game gives you differently. So like I've not done exactly the same things in both exhibits, and then I'm trying to like add little details in. So obviously you can put foliage and stuff like that inside the exhibits to try and give them some difference and give them some like nuance and difference again. And then I'm trying to I know anyone that's plays Planet Zoo will know that like the challenge of trying to use these great big boxes with something that's such a tiny animal is like, you'd really want this right up at the path level, but unfortunately, because of the size of the box, that means that the exhibit kind of towers above the guest. Hopefully one day we'll get smaller exhibit boxes. I can only imagine it must be something that they're doing, that they're working on, that's coming along. But yes, I thought this would just kind of give it a nice little blend between that bit where the burrow is and then something that's going to continue on for the rest of this area. So this area itself, so obviously in the last episode we did the Dromedary camel and that whole kind of bazaar area and the market and the fennec foxes and all that sort of stuff. If you missed that one, go back and check it out, because I think it's a really good one and lots of people haven't seen it, unfortunately, on the channel. I think that's probably because I've been away for a while, not done a lot. But yeah, so this is actually a whole new area. It's still part of the northern desert section, but this is like a little bit more of a kind of immersive walking through these desert-y spots, these kind of rocky spots within the desert. And there's going to be a whole bunch of animals here. Unusually for me, I've done more planning in this section than I would usually. So yeah, I think this is going to be a good one. There's going to be hopefully be kind of a few different animals coming along in this. So you'll see lots of kind of windy paths and various different bits. And mostly the animals are coming from underneath the habitat. Interestingly, in the background there, you see me using the aardvark. So I started building this habitat before the DLC released, and I kind of guessed that an aardvark will be roughly around the same sort of size as the porcupine. And then that would mean I could kind of get away with, get my spacing right and my like scale right and all that sort of thing, and make sure that they could get in and out of the different sections. So African crested porcupines themselves, quite interesting animals. So I mean, they're the largest porcupine in the world. As I said, they live in these kind of hilly, rocky habitats. And in the wild, that's where you'll find them. Much bigger than the other variations of porcupines that we get across the world. And the quills themselves, obviously the quills are the kind of iconic thing, the thing that everyone recognises about a porcupine. So they're apparently, I didn't read until I was kind of researching this video. Apparently lots of people think that they can shoot them out. That's a bit of a myth. Obviously they don't do that. Because they're like defensive tool, so they will raise those quills up and sort of stick them out as a defensive mechanism, but also to make themselves look bigger. That's a pretty common thing I think you see in the wild, is that animals that try and kind of present, especially animals that are kind of smaller, that are a bit more vulnerable, try and present themselves as bigger, and that typically that would be their first kind of line of defense. Make me look big. So that something doesn't want to attack me. But they will actually back into an animal as well. So they've used the kind of the quills themselves. They're not barred like some of the other porcupines, but they're obviously, it's not something you want to get jabbed into you. So they can fend off a lion and that sort of thing. So you're seeing we've jumped around a little bit here. We've gone back into that. What we're working on here is this transition. So as I said, like the boxes, as soon as you try and build the boxes for the exhibits, you end up with these problems where you've got these big things that kind of stick out over the landscape. So you can do what I've done. So I've dropped it down below the path level there. And now I'm trying to blend it back into a bit of the land. And I'm going to use this bit of land to hide the fact that there's going to be a building behind it. So it's not supposed to be something that's a natural form of the landscape. So I'm using the breeze blocks here just to kind of retain this wall, or retain this lump of terrain. And then here's me using these the PVC strip curtains that you get on the walkthrough exhibits. That are absolutely perfect for this sort of thing. You can use these, and I didn't realise until now you can actually recolour those hanging strips. So this was so that the guests don't get, there's not a view, that the light is obscured for them in there. I spent quite a lot of time in this burrow itself, so it's quite difficult. Obviously, the inside when you do a cave like this, the inside of these terrain textures is obviously the same as the outside of the terrain. So it's kind of difficult, especially in this biome, to get kind of really good looking mud. So I do quite a lot of work in there to sort of texture up that space and not make it look like it's too artificial. But it is supposed to be artificial, so that's a real challenge. I think that's one of the most difficult things to do in Planet Zoo, and there are people that do this better than I do, that's for sure. But making a kind of deliberately artificial looking space, if you know what I mean. So it's supposed to look like it's real, but also not so real that it doesn't feel like it's artificial, if that makes sense. So I did a couple of things here. I'm using the stalactites. The kind of like, there's people that are way better, people like Caesar that are way better at using that texture. That he's a specialist in creating these kind of mud walls. And it's not something I've done loads, but you'll see, like, I've put a couple of places where I've put discrete but visible steel beams in there, just to kind of make it again feel like this isn't carved out of the landscape. This is not a natural feature. This is something that the zoo have built. So yeah, it's trying to get that blend, and then trying to get some texture into the ground so it doesn't just feel like flat sand. Trying to get some, make it feel a bit more like cavey and cozy in here, putting some of these vines in. A bunch of these things are not appropriate to the biome of the animal, and if I was to worry about the like welfare and all that sort of thing, I wouldn't use these. But I tend to go for the aesthetic of a habitat over the exact realism of it, and the exact requirements and stuff. So I'm using some of these things like the hanging moss and the roots and stuff that not necessarily right, but kind of I think give the overall aesthetic of what I'm trying to achieve. So and interestingly, what I was reading was that so they're as I said, they're primarily a nocturnal animal, and they tend to spend quite a lot of their time in the night or in the daytime, underground chewing on bones, and that's apparently to get the calcium and those sorts of things out of them. So they're a herbivore, so they don't actually eat. They won't kill an animal. Certainly, they don't hunt or anything like that. They're far too small and not got the right tools for it. But they will, it's probably a thing that lots of animals. I know there's like goats and stuff, isn't there, that like lick rock in order to get the nutrients and the minerals and things out of it, and so they will grind up bones to kind of maintain their teeth, but also to get the calcium out of it. The sort of thing I'd love to see. I mean, probably like I think the animations that we get for the animals in Planet Zoo are amazing, but those little details would be cool to see as the sort of like upgraded food options and stuff. So we are now working on their behind the scenes stuff and things. So if you've watched me before, you'll know that I kind of like, this is my thing. I really, really enjoy backstage areas of habitats. And again, this is actually quite a big one. So this is to allow the porcupines to have a section that's guest facing, but also a section that is where they go when the habitats are when they're off exhibit and the evenings and the zoo's locked up and that sort of thing. Where do they go? So they come back into this little section. And Zimba, the style of Zimba, this zoo that we're in, is supposed to be sort of semi-modern African zoo. So a lot of the upkeep areas, I think I've done this quite a lot across the build of the zoo, is like much more shabby when it gets to areas that are not guest facing. So I'm trying to do that here, playing around with the fact that they've put in like a lower section of the wall where the animals are like it's not exposed to the block work and that sort of thing, but it's become a bit more worn down over the years. You've got some mixture of textures and things in here. This building itself, as you see, we've got a wall on the right hand side. I'm going to be using this wall again for the bunch of the other animals that are going to be in this section, and probably a few others. And I think I became conscious of whilst building this one that I tend to have a habit of building kind of standalone habitats quite often, even in these bigger build projects. So like an animal will have its exhibit and then it will have its backstage area, all sort of self-contained. And I don't think that's particularly realistic for an animal of this size. So it's a larger building. It's probably going to end up housing the backstage for kind of 3 or 4 different animals. And this was me putting together a way of kind of shutting them off, like implying a way of shutting them off at night, doing a bunch of details like power and that sort of thing. And I have to say, so I really kind of enjoy this sort of side of the detailing. And this is the second animal that we've worked on for the Arid Animal Pack. And I have to say, I'm really enjoying these animals. I generally have to say, most of the time, I actually really enjoy the animal only packs, especially by now. You'll have to let me know what you guys think in the comments, but by now, when we've got so many build pieces, I don't feel like I need a whole lot more in terms of the build pieces. I would say probably only things like smaller exhibit boxes. Everything else, I tend to find that I can just make something work now. I don't have to worry about kind of fighting over the pieces and things. We've got so many more smaller pieces than we used to have. So many more smaller build pieces, that sort of thing. You can add as many details. Like really, you can spend as much as you want much time as you want on the details. As you can see me doing, we will be moving into the front stage section of the habitat again in a second. But so yeah, this is and there's a couple of cinematics at the end where you can see this all kind of in its context, and you'll see the animals and the guests moving around and that sort of stuff. Bit of lighting going in. As you can see, I fussed over all of the trying to work out all the wiring and all that sort of stuff for it, and how the heating would be controlled and how the cooling would work, all that sort of stuff. Again, as I said, I just find that stuff really enjoyable to kind of imagine how the practical usage of this space would work out. There's a few sections coming up in terms of next animals. So I think probably, and as I said at the beginning of this episode, I've done a lot more planning than I would usually do. So I'm thinking probably the sand cat. There will be a few other animals coming into this area from previous packs, because actually there's a few animals that I haven't used that work really well in this section. I have to say, in most instances, I prefer building for the smaller animals, the meerkats, the fennec foxes. These smaller habitats are much more fun for me to do. The big kind of open areas are less of something that I enjoy. Although I have to say, you haven't seen it yet, but there is an African elephant, a huge, great African elephant section that I've been developing in Zimba. That's quite close. I'm not sure when we'll get that. Maybe episode 10 or 11 or something. I think we should be at episode 8 now. So yeah, a few more details, just working through that space, and they've mostly all come together. Drainage and that sort of thing. Decided I needed a little table, food prep area for them. Again, all just kind of thinking about how I would use this space. This was weird little experiment. I thought, wouldn't it be so there's a section chopped out of that melon. How can I make it look like there's a cleaver or something that's on the table that's cut that up? So I did it started off trying to do it with the art shapes, with the font pieces, and then decided actually the trowel here is probably looks a bit more like a knife there. And I just love that, hiding things away, creatively thinking how you're gonna solve a little problem. So we're finally in the front stage of the habitat, and you can see all of the ground, all of the path here is all elevated. So I have finally decided to go to the dark side and start using some of the mods. So I'm actually only using one mod, and I think I probably will only ever use one mod, and it's the free build mod. And you can see there's a little checkbox down in the right hand side of my screen there that allows me to do a few things that you can't do in the vanilla game. And there's always a bit of a risk in doing this, that something might break, or I think I've always been quite resistant to mods because I was worried that my zoos would end up being broken and I would lose the files. I'm really, really careful about saving and backing up and that sort of thing. So who knows? Fingers crossed I won't have that problem, but maybe I will at some point. But the free build mod, the biggest thing that it lets you do, as far as I'm concerned, the most amazing thing that it lets you do is, there's a few things. So it lets you shift the terrain around an existing path. So I can lay that path down. As long as I have it as a raised path, I can lay that path down and then move all the terrain around it. And that's what I did. So I've purposely built this area with all these raised paths in it, and then I have adjusted the terrain around them, and that just gave me like so much more freedom for deciding how the animals will get in and out of these sections, and that sort of thing. And the second thing it lets you do, which again is amazing, is that it lets you take gridded pieces, so items that are typically only able to be used on the grid, and make them non-gridded pieces. So you literally have a little checkbox that means you can use anything, and you can use habitat in like enrichment items and like rotate them in all axes and all that sort of things. I don't think I do that particularly in this habitat. So you can see I've now got these like sections. So I've got a section, like a viewing area back there, kind of at the back of our view at the moment, and then a different area in the foreground. And I'm trying to separate them off, because one of those things that you kind of want, I think, when you're designing habitats is to try and make it so that guests aren't really looking at guests very much. So you can see that I would be able to see through and view the guests from over there. I don't kind of want that. I want to be able to have it so that looking into the habitat is like an immersive experience, and I don't get that immersion broken by looking at other guests. So I'm trying to break up these sections. I have to a couple of times check in to see that I am still getting the animals able to traverse this area, because they've got like that common problem that animals have, the smaller animals have, is that they realistically could get in and out of an area that the game is a bit more restrictive in terms of using that. Then I started looking at the actual kind of enrichment items, and then I discovered, and I've since done a bit more research, I realised that they're actually quite proficient swimmers, surprisingly better swimmers than they are on land, a bit more adept on land. And I had noticed that the hot tap, not one that I've used very often, but these hot taps are included in their enrichment, and they will actually come and use it. So I was like, okay, well, how can I get... And this little porcupine comes over and plays with the ball while I'm doing it, which is so cool when they do that sort of thing. And so I started to think, how can I use this enrichment item but not make it look like there's a big pool of water? I probably should have actually given them a swimming area. That might have made more sense. But instead I decided to make them like a little paddling pool, I guess, at one of the fountain pieces. So I've put the tap in. They use these very rarely, unfortunately, the hot tabs, but they do use them. And I think you'll see one actually using it in some of the cinematics I've got at the end of the video. So a bit of gravel, bit of rubble around. This is a little blueprint that I've got that I made a while ago. Just allows me to sort of pop these multiple stones down at once. And then you can see again I had a little bit of a problem there with the accessibility, because I want it to be small, I want it to be cozy, I want it to feel like it's kind of intimate. Actually, one of the things just worth looking at on this screen, look how, maybe we'll catch it again, the detail that's on the side of this path. Look at that little detail, for a raised path. That's such a cool one. So yeah, we're quite happy to have that showing as much as possible. Little bedding area. So this is probably the main viewing area for them. Again, it's small, but it's like on a hill, so kind of anywhere you're viewing this, you can get a good view of the whole area of the habitat. And then I'm breaking it up again. There's a bit of that mud wall back there. You can see in the background we've got the areas that we had in the previous episode from the camel habitat. And then I'm taking a bit of liberties with the foliage types and stuff here, just to kind of break up those muddy walls. And actually, yeah, those little Kentia palms are a newly added thing. Again, not appropriate to this biome, but such a cool addition. And actually, they sway. So look, you can just see that sort of swaying around. It's obviously exaggerated by the speed build, but you can see it swaying around in the wind. So we've got a couple of minutes left, but we're nearly at the end of the speed build. A bit more detailing, a few more bits of mud and things. And I've implied, you may not have noticed this, but there's a couple of places where I've implied extra keeper access. So there's a second door here because there's a tunnel that goes through underneath the viewing area. So you just saw that one of the porcupines come up through it, and that's not something I wanted the keepers to be able to come up through. So I ended up implying that there was going to be another door. So the keepers actually can't get into this section. It would be something I could do. I might do it with the next one of these exhibits. Is just give it, have it so that the keepers can get kind of everywhere. Again, one of those things that's probably on my wish list of things to be able to get would be to be able to have multiple habitat entrances so that you can get keepers in and out of different sections. Final little bits of this then. So I decided originally I was going to have glass, all like, sort of high glass here, but decided I didn't really need to do that, and it would be nicer to have an open view here and a kind of like elbow height rail and that you can look over. That's going to be it for this one, peeps. There's going to be a couple of cinematics coming up, but that's it for this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this. My name is Toves, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take it easy.